The roar of the stadium echoed in Dante Russo's ears as he jogged off the field, sweat dripping down his face and jersey. The crowd chanted his name, Russo, Russo, as they always did when he scored the winning goal. Cameras flashed, reporters waved for interviews, and fans shouted his praises. Dante barely noticed. It was routine by now. He flashed his signature grin, ran a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair, and blew a kiss toward the roaring crowd, sending his loyal fans into an even bigger frenzy. Everything felt predictable, almost choreographed. "That's another one for the books." "Ha, Russo?" said Marco, his teammate and closest friend on the team, as they approached the tunnel. Marco slapped Dante's back hard enough to jostle him. "Nothing new," Dante replied coolly, though there was a spark of boredom in his tone. He was the star of the team, the golden boy of the league, and for years now he'd played up the role effortlessly. He had the fame, the wealth, and the attention of millions. On the outside, his life was perfect, but deep down it all felt hollow. In the locker room, the team celebrated their win with raucous laughter. Beer cans cracked open, and the kind of crude jokes that only players who'd been around each other too long could appreciate. Dante leaned against his locker, pulling off his cleats, half listening as Marco, never one to miss an opportunity to stir the pot, raised his voice over the noise. "All right, lads, we need a new challenge for Russo." Marco grinned wickedly, nudging Dante with his elbow. "We all know our boy here has charm for days, right? The fans eat it up, the ladies can't get enough of him, and he's never met a bet he couldn't win." The others laughed and nodded, and Dante smirked despite himself. Marco's antics never ended. "What's the challenge this time?" someone asked from across the room. Marco's eyes darted to his phone, where the team's social media feed buzzed with post-game chatter. His smirk widened as he held up a photo, a grainy image of a fan outside the stadium, wearing a striped shirt and clutching a soccer scarf. She was heavy-set, her shoulders slumped as she stood among the crowd. "Her," Marco said, pointing at the photo. "Sarah Graham. She's at every single game, front row, cheering her lungs out. Can't miss her." Dante's brow furrowed. And Marco continued, "I dare you to ask her out. Take her on a date. Make it real, too. No tricks." The room erupted into hoots and hollers. "You're insane," Dante said, shaking his head. "What, are you scared?" Marco taunted, grinning. "Come on, man. It's harmless. She'd probably faint if you gave her the time of day." Dante frowned. He didn't like the way Marco said it. He didn't like the laughter that followed either, loud and mean-spirited. Something about it didn't sit right with him. "It's a bet," Marco pushed. "You're not backing down now, are you? You're Dante Russo." That got everyone's attention. Dante felt a dozen pairs of eyes on him, all waiting, all expecting him to play along, like he always did. He was Dante Russo, after all, the golden boy, the charmer. He didn't lose bets. Forcing a grin, he leaned back and crossed his arms. "Fine, I'll do it." The locker room exploded into cheers and jeers, Marco clapping him on the shoulder. "That's the spirit, my man. A date with Sarah Graham." Dante laughed with them, but as the noise continued around him, he felt a strange twist in his stomach, a flicker of something he couldn't quite name. The next day, Dante sat in his sleek black car outside the team's stadium. Sarah Graham was easy to spot in the small group of fans lingering near the gates, holding handmade signs and team merchandise. She stood near the back, her striped shirt from the photo unmistakable, her scarf wrapped tightly around her fingers. She wasn't smiling. Her face looked almost pensive, as if she wasn't sure she belonged there at all. Dante adjusted his sunglasses, sighing as he ran a hand over his face. What was he doing? This felt ridiculous. But when Marco's mocking voice popped into his head, Dante's resolve hardened. This was just another game. He was Dante Russo. He didn't lose. He climbed out of the car, slamming the door a little harder than necessary. Fans noticed him immediately, gasping and scrambling for their phones. A few younger fans ran up to him, and he plastered on his usual grin, signing autographs and posing for quick selfies as he made his way towards Sarah. She didn't see him coming, Her head was tilted downward, her attention fixed on the scarf she was nervously twisting in her hands. "Hey," Dante said, his voice low and casual. Sarah startled, her wide brown eyes snapping up to meet his. Her face flushed instantly. "Oh, hi." Dante gave her his most charming smile. "You're Sarah, right?" She blinked at him, her expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Yeah, I'm Sarah, Dante Russo," he said, holding out his hand as if she didn't already know. Sarah stared at it for a moment before shaking it hesitantly. "I know who you are," she said quietly. Her voice was soft, unsure. "I thought so," Dante replied smoothly. "Listen, I was wondering, do you want to grab dinner with me sometime?" The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Sarah just stared at him as if she hadn't heard correctly. Then she laughed, the sound nervous and disbelieving. "Wait, what? Dinner?" Dante repeated, still smiling, though it felt forced now. "With me? Why?" Sarah blurted, her brows knitting together. She looked around as if expecting someone to jump out and yell, "Surprise! Is this some kind of joke?" "No joke," Dante lied smoothly. "I just thought it might be nice to get to know one of my biggest fans. What do you say?" Sarah opened her mouth, then closed it again, her gaze darting around as if searching for an escape. Dante felt the eyes of nearby fans watching the scene unfold, and he could hear the faint clicks of phones capturing the moment. He needed her to say yes. Sarah's voice wavered, and her face flushed a deeper red. "I guess so? I mean, sure. Okay." Dante grinned, forcing a cheerfulness he didn't feel. "Great. Tomorrow night. I'll pick you up 7? Sarah nodded slowly, her confusion still evident. "Okay, perfect," he said, backing away. "See you then." He turned and walked back to his car, waving briefly at the gathering crowd as he climbed in. Once the door shut behind him, the smile dropped from his face, replaced by a scowl. He sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel tightly, trying to ignore the knot in his stomach. "What am I doing?" he thought to himself. Sarah spent the rest of the day feeling like she'd stepped into some kind of alternate reality. Dante Russo had just asked her out. The whole interaction replayed in her mind over and over, but no matter how many times she tried to make sense of it, she couldn't. Why would someone like him even notice someone like her? By the time she got home, her phone was buzzing with messages. Someone had posted a video of Dante talking to her, and now her name was spreading across the internet like wildfire. Her friends messaged her in disbelief. "Dante Russo asked you out? Is this real? How did that even happen?" "You're famous, Sarah." Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, her scarf still clutched tightly in her hands. She didn't know whether to feel excited or terrified. None of this made sense. People like Dante Russo didn't date people like her. She glanced at herself in the mirror. Her round face, her plain striped shirt, her soft body that she'd spent years trying to hide under layers of fabric. Why me? And yet, deep down, some small part of her, a part she tried to silence for years, dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a reason. The day of the date arrived, and Sarah spent hours convincing herself not to cancel. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her reflection. She had tried on nearly everything she owned, finally settling on a simple navy dress with a cardigan. It wasn't flashy, but it was comfortable. It was her. Why did I agree to this? She wondered for the 100th time. Her phone buzzed. A text. It was Dante that says, "I'm outside." Sarah's heart leapt to her throat. She stood up on shaky legs, taking one last look in the mirror. "It's just dinner," she whispered to herself. Nothing more. Outside, Dante leaned against his car, hands casually tucked into his pockets. He wore dark jeans, a crisp shirt, and an expensive watch that glinted under the streetlight. When he saw her, his face broke into that charming smile she had seen on 1,000 magazine covers. "Hey," he said as she approached, his tone light. "You look nice." Sarah flushed and fidgeted with the strap of her purse. "Thanks." He opened the passenger door for her, and she climbed in, still feeling like she was in someone else's life. The car smelled faintly of leather and expensive cologne. Everything about Dante Russo screamed untouchable, a man from a world she would never belong to. The drive to the restaurant was awkward at best. Dante made an effort to talk, asking her about soccer, about which games she liked watching most. Sarah answered cautiously, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Dante seemed distracted, as if he were reciting lines from a script rather than truly listening. "You're really into soccer," Dante said at one point, glancing at her. Sarah nodded. "It's always been my escape. I used to play when I was younger, but I had to quit when life got complicated." "Why's that?" he asked, though his tone lacked the genuine curiosity she hoped for. Sarah hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Life's just different for me than it is for most people." Dante didn't press further, and for that, she was grateful. But the silence that followed was heavier than before. The restaurant was just as Sarah imagined it would be. Expensive, sleek, and filled with people who seemed plucked from a magazine cover. As they walked to their table, Sarah felt the weight of judgmental glances. A woman in a glittering dress looked her up and down, whispering to her date, and Sarah's cheeks burned. She fought the urge to shrink. Dante didn't seem to notice, or maybe he didn't care. "You all right?" he asked as they sat down. "Fine," Sarah mumbled, plastering on a smile. The waiter arrived, reciting specials with an air of boredom, and Sarah tried not to gawk at the prices on the menu. She opted for the cheapest option, a salad, while Dante ordered steak without hesitation. "This is nice, right?" he said, leaning back in his chair, his smile practiced. Sarah nodded faintly. "Yeah, nice." The evening crawled forward, every moment feeling stilted and unnatural. Dante tried to keep the conversation alive, but Sarah couldn't help feeling like a prop. He asked surface-level questions, made charming remarks, but something about it all rang hollow. "So," Dante said as the waiter cleared their plates, "tell me about yourself. What do you do for fun?" Sarah blinked, caught off guard. I read. I volunteer sometimes." "Volunteer?" he echoed, sounding surprised. "Yeah," she said quietly, fidgeting with the edge of her napkin. "There's a community center near my apartment. I help out with the kids there, mostly soccer stuff. They love it." Dante tilted his head, genuinely interested for the first time that evening. "You coach soccer?" "Sort of," Sarah replied with a small shrug. "It's not much, but it makes me happy." "That's cool," Dante said, though he seemed unsure what to do with the information. "You've got a good heart." Sarah looked up sharply. His tone was sincere, but something about it still felt off, like he was searching for the right thing to say. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed on the table, lighting up with a message. She ignored it, but the screen lit up again. Dante noticed. "You can check that if you want." Sarah shook her head. "It's nothing." Dante leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "You don't get out much, do you?" The question stung, though he hadn't meant it cruelly. Sarah forced a smile. "No, I guess I don't." For the rest of the meal, Sarah felt smaller and smaller, like she was shrinking into herself. Dante wasn't being unkind, but there was an undeniable wall between them, one she didn't have the strength to climb. After dinner, Dante insisted on walking her to her door. The night air was cool, and Sarah hugged her cardigan tightly around herself. "Tonight was fun," Dante said as they reached her apartment building. Sarah hesitated before answering. "It was nice. Thank you." Dante smiled that dazzling smile of his, and for a moment, Sarah allowed herself to believe it was real, that maybe he saw something in her worth his time. "Well, good night," he said, stepping back toward his car. Sarah watched him leave, her heart aching with a mixture of hope and doubt. Once inside her apartment, she sank onto her couch, staring at her phone. The screen still glowed with unread messages from friends. "Is this for real? Dante Russo? Tell us everything. You're trending, Sarah. People are talking about you." Sarah groaned, tossing her phone onto the table. She didn't want to see it. She didn't want to think about it. Something about the evening felt too surreal, like a dream that was bound to turn into a nightmare. She had felt out of place the entire time, and yet, a small part of her still clung to the idea that maybe Dante had seen something special in her. "Don't be stupid," she told herself. "People like him don't notice people like you." Meanwhile, Dante drove back to his apartment in silence, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The bet echoed in his mind. Marco's laughter, the teasing, the pressure to prove himself yet again. But now he couldn't stop thinking about Sarah, about the way she had shrunk under the gazes at the restaurant, about the quiet strength in her voice when she talked about coaching kids, and the way she had smiled, small and hesitant, like she was afraid to believe someone could care. "Why did you agree to this?" he muttered to himself, scowling at his reflection in the rearview mirror. He had expected Sarah to be loud, clingy, or eager to bask in his fame, like most of the people who chased after him. But she wasn't. She was guarded, vulnerable, and real in a way he didn't know how to handle. When he got home, his phone buzzed with a message from Marco. Marco says, "Well, how'd it go? She faint yet?" Dante stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. For the first time, he didn't want to answer. The next morning, Sarah woke up to an inbox flooded with messages. Social media was buzzing, and somehow her name was trending alongside Dante Russo's. She scrolled through the comments with a growing sense of dread. This has to be a prank, right? Why would he take her out? I'd pay to see the look on her face when she realizes it's all a joke. Sarah's stomach churned. She locked her phone and tossed it aside, burying her face in her hands. Why had she agreed to the date? What had she been thinking? She forced herself to get up, going through the motions of her morning routine. The community center awaited her, and she refused to let last night, or the opinions of strangers, ruin her day. At the same time, Dante sat slumped on his couch, staring blankly at the TV. The game highlights played, showing him scoring the winning goal the night before, but he barely paid attention. His mind kept drifting back to Sarah. The bet had seemed harmless, just another laugh, another story to add to Marco's endless repertoire of pranks. But now it didn't feel harmless, felt cruel. He thought about the look on Sarah's face when they entered the restaurant, the way she'd shrunk under the judgmental glances, the way she had smiled faintly even when she was clearly uncomfortable. And then there was her voice when she talked about volunteering, her quiet strength despite everything. Marco's text from the night before still lingered on his screen. Dante grabbed his phone, his thumb hovering over the keys. "Marco, well, how'd it go? She faint yet?" He started typing, then deleted the message. For the first time in years, Dante didn't want to play the game. He didn't want to be the guy who went along with every joke, no matter how heartless. But he also didn't know what to do next. By afternoon, Sarah arrived at the community center. The small soccer field in the back buzzed with energy as kids ran around, shouting and laughing. Being here grounded her. The noise, the smiles, the simple joy of the kids reminded her that the world wasn't all bad. "Miss Sarah," a small voice called out. She turned to see Liam, a 6-year-old with untied shoelaces and an oversized jersey, running toward her. "Are we playing today?" "Of course we are," Sarah said, forcing a smile as she knelt to tie his shoes. "You ready to show me those moves we practiced?" Liam grinned and nodded enthusiastically before running off toward the others. Sarah stood, watching the kids for a moment, her smile turning genuine. This was her happy place. "Hey, Sarah!" The voice startled her, and she turned to see Dante standing by the gate, his hands stuffed in his pockets. He wore a plain t-shirt and jeans, no fancy watches or sunglasses this time. He looked different, almost out of place. "What are you doing here?" Sarah asked, her tone cautious. Dante shrugged, stepping onto the field. "I wanted to see this place you talked about. The kids, the soccer. It sounded important to you." Sarah stared at him, her brow furrowing. "Why?" Dante hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know. I guess I just wanted to see the real you. You seemed different here." Her guard shot up. "So this is part of the joke, then? You're following me now?" Dante flinched as though she'd slapped him. "No, it's not like that." "Then what is it, Dante?" Sarah demanded, crossing her arms. Because this doesn't make sense. None of it makes sense. He sighed, looking out at the kids running around. I don't know how to explain it. I didn't like how last night went. I don't like how I acted. And I wanted to see this part of your life. The part that makes you, you. Sarah blinked, caught off guard by his words. He looked earnest, vulnerable even, which threw her completely. Why do you care? She asked quietly. Dante met her gaze, holding it for a moment. I don't know yet, but I think I should. Before Sarah could respond, Liam ran up, panting and grinning. Miss Sarah, who's that? Sarah glanced down at Liam, then back at Dante. He's no one. Dante winced but didn't argue. Instead, he knelt to Liam's level. I'm Dante. You like soccer? Huh? Liam nodded eagerly. I'm gonna be a striker, just like Miss Sarah was. Is that so? Dante said, smiling faintly. Well, I play striker too. Maybe you can show me some moves. Liam's face lit up. Really? Dante nodded, standing up and glancing at Sarah. If it's okay with you? Sarah hesitated, torn between her instincts to push Dante away and the hopeful look on Liam's face. Finally, she sighed. Fine, but don't get in the way. I'll try not to, Dante said, following Liam onto the field. For the next hour, Dante surprised Sarah. He wasn't the arrogant soccer star she'd come to expect. He played with the kids, showing them simple tricks, laughing when they fumbled and cheering when they succeeded. Liam followed him around like a shadow, soaking up every moment. Sarah stood on the sidelines, watching with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. Who was this version of Dante? And why was he here? When practice ended, Dante walked over, wiping sweat from his brow. You've got some future stars out here. Yeah, they're great, Sarah replied, her tone guarded. Dante's smile faded slightly. Look, I know you don't trust me, and I don't blame you, but I meant what I said. I wanted to see this part of your life. It matters to you, so it matters to me too. Sarah searched his face, trying to figure out if he was playing some kind of game. But for the first time, she saw something real, something that didn't feel like a performance. Why are you really here? She asked softly. Dante hesitated, then sighed. Because I feel like I've messed up, and I don't know how to fix it. Sarah stared at him for a moment, her heart pounding. She didn't know what to believe, but before she could say anything else, Liam tugged on her sleeve. Miss Sarah, is he coming back tomorrow? Sarah glanced down at the boy, his hopeful expression making her chest ache. She looked back at Dante, who was watching her carefully. That's up to him, Sarah said finally. Dante nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I'll be here. That evening, as Sarah walked home, she couldn't stop thinking about Dante. He had shown up at the community center out of nowhere, played with the kids, and said things that rattled her. It didn't make sense, but part of her, against all her instincts, wanted to believe him. Don't be stupid, she told herself again. People like him don't change. And yet, when she thought about the way he'd laughed with Liam or the quiet sincerity in his voice when he said he'd come back, a small voice whispered back, what if he's different? True to his word, Dante returned the next day. Sarah spotted him from across the field before practice even started, standing by the gate with a soccer ball under one arm and his usual confident posture. He waved when he saw her, that signature smile still present, but it felt softer now, less rehearsed. You're back, Sarah said flatly as she approached. You didn't have to come. I said I would, Dante replied simply, tossing the ball in the air and catching it. Besides, I thought you could use an assistant coach. Sarah narrowed her eyes at him. This isn't a PR stunt, is it? I don't want cameras showing up or you turning this into something about you. Dante held up his hands. No cameras, no PR, just me. The sincerity in his voice disarmed her. She didn't know what his game was, if there even was a game. But she couldn't deny that the kids had lit up when he joined them yesterday. And, begrudgingly, a small part of her had too. Fine, Sarah said, but don't let it go to your head. I'm still in charge here. Dante grinned. Yes, coach. She rolled her eyes, but he noticed the faintest tug of a smile on her lips as she turned away. The kids swarmed Dante the moment he stepped onto the field, eager to learn more of his pro tricks. He knelt down to their level, showing them how to juggle the ball with their knees and dribble with better control. The laughter and energy on the field were infectious, and even Sarah found herself relaxing. At one point, she caught herself watching Dante as he crouched down to talk to Liam, patiently encouraging him after he stumbled during a passing drill. His demeanor was so different from the arrogant soccer star she'd seen on TV. Here, he was just a guy, smiling and laughing like the rest of them. "You're staring," one of the teenage girls on the team teased as she passed by Sarah. Giggling, Sarah snapped out of it, cheeks flushing. "I'm not staring. I'm supervising." "Sure," the girl replied with a knowing grin before running off. Sarah shook her head, muttering under her breath, but her gaze drifted back to Dante again. After practice, the kids trickled off the field, waving their goodbyes to both Sarah and Dante. Liam, as always, was the last to leave, dragging his soccer ball behind him. "Coach Dante, you're coming back, right?" Liam asked, his big eyes hopeful. Dante glanced at Sarah before answering. "If Coach Sarah will let me." Liam turned to Sarah, practically bouncing on his toes. "Can he, Miss Sarah? Please?" Sarah sighed, her resolve softening against Liam's enthusiasm. "If he behaves himself." "Yes," Liam cheered, running off to join his mother waiting near the parking lot. Dante grinned, brushing his hands together. "Well, that's a win in my book." Sarah didn't respond immediately, studying him instead. "Why are you really doing this, Dante? Don't tell me it's just because you felt bad about last night." Dante sobered, shoving his hands into his pockets. "I guess I'm trying to figure that out too. Maybe it's because I see something here that I don't have anywhere else." "Like what?" "Purpose," Dante said quietly. "You care about this place, these kids. And yesterday, I don't know, it made me realize how empty my life feels in comparison." Sarah blinked, caught off guard by his honesty. She had expected excuses, deflection, anything but this raw vulnerability. "Well," she said finally, crossing her arms, "if that's true, you'll have to prove it. Actions speak louder than words." Dante nodded. "I will. Promise." Over the next several weeks, Dante became a regular fixture at the community center. At first, the kids were in awe of him, starstruck by the famous soccer player helping with their drills. But as the days turned into weeks, he became less of a celebrity and more of a coach. Someone they trusted, someone who showed up. He listened when they struggled, encouraged them when they failed, and celebrated their small victories like they were championships. Sarah watched the transformation unfold with equal parts suspicion and surprise. She had expected Dante to get bored, to disappear when no one was watching. But he didn't. One afternoon, after a particularly rowdy practice, Sarah found Dante sitting on the grass, tying Liam's shoes for him while the boy chattered endlessly about his big goal during their scrimmage. "You're really good at this," Sarah said as she approached, hands on her hips. Dante looked up, smiling faintly. "At tying shoes?" "At coaching," Sarah clarified. "They listen to you. They look up to you." Dante shrugged, standing as Liam ran off to join his friends. "It feels good, you know? Like I'm actually doing something that matters for once." Sarah tilted her head, studying him. "You could have done that a long time ago. Why now?" Dante's smile faded slightly. He looked out over the field, watching the kids chase each other with the ball. "Because no one ever expected me to. I've spent my whole life playing a role, being the guy everyone wants me to be. The golden boy, the show-off, the one who always wins. But here, I don't have to be that guy. I can just be." Sarah didn't know how to respond. For weeks now, she had watched him change. The Dante Russo she saw now was nothing like the man who had asked her out as part of some cruel joke. But part of her still wondered if it was real. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked suddenly. Dante turned to her, his expression cautious. "The dinner, the dare," Sarah clarified, her voice steady. "Do you ever think about why you did it?" Dante flinched, looking down at his shoes. "All the time." Sarah crossed her arms, waiting. And I hate that I did it," Dante admitted, his voice low, I hate that I hurt you. And I hate the guy I was when I said yes to Marco. Sarah's heart twisted. She wasn't expecting him to answer so honestly. I didn't deserve your time that night, Dante continued, meeting her gaze. And I don't deserve it now. But I'm here because I'm trying to be better. I want to be better. Sarah stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of insincerity. But there was none. You've got a lot to prove, Dante, she said softly. I know, he replied, but I'm not going anywhere. Dante's words stuck with Sarah as she walked home that evening. For so long, she had believed that people like Dante, people who seemed untouchable, never changed. And maybe most of them didn't. But Dante was different. She could see it in the way he spoke to the kids, the way he showed up every day without fail, and the way he looked at her now. Not with pity or amusement, but with respect. When she got home, she found herself scrolling through old photos from the early days of her soccer fandom. Images of Dante in his prime, celebrating goals and smiling for the cameras. He had always seemed larger than life, untouchable and perfect. But perfection, she realized, wasn't real. People made mistakes. People hurt others. The real question was whether they could change, and whether she could forgive. The days turned into weeks, and Dante became as much a part of the community center as Sarah herself. His transformation was slow but steady, and it didn't go unnoticed. The kids loved him, following him around like he was the big brother they'd always wanted. Even the other volunteers, who had been skeptical at first, began to trust him. But Sarah was still cautious. Every time she let her guard down, some small voice in her head warned her not to get too comfortable. People didn't just change overnight, and she couldn't afford to let herself believe that the Dante Russo, had become a better man. One evening after practice, as the kids ran off and the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah found herself sitting beside Dante on the edge of the field. You're quiet tonight, he said, glancing at her. What's on your mind? Sarah shrugged, hugging her knees to her chest. Just thinking about why you're still here. Dante leaned back on his hands, looking up at the sky. I told you. I'm trying to be better, and I told you that you'd have to prove it. I know, he replied, but I'm not doing this for some kind of reward, Sarah. I'm doing this because it feels right. Sarah turned to look at him, studying his face. And what happens when you get bored? When the cameras are back on you and you have another championship to win? What happens to all of this? Dante sat up straight, his expression serious. This isn't just something I'm doing to pass the time. I don't care about the cameras. I don't care about the noise. He gestured to the empty field in front of them. This matters to me. You matter to me. Sarah blinked, stunned into silence. He had said it so simply, so honestly, that it took her a moment to process. I don't know if I believe you, she said quietly. I don't blame you for that, Dante replied, his voice gentle. But I'll keep showing up until you do. The next weekend, the community center hosted a small soccer tournament for the kids. Parents filled the bleachers, cheering as the kids played their hearts out. Dante and Sarah coached opposite teams, turning the day into a playful competition. Dante's team, led by Liam, put up a good fight, but Sarah's team edged out a victory in the final game. As the kids celebrated, Dante walked over to where Sarah was handing out juice boxes. Rigged, he teased, grinning. Your team had an unfair advantage. Oh, and what's that? Sarah asked, raising an eyebrow. They had you as a coach. Sarah rolled her eyes, but she couldn't stop the smile that tugged at her lips. Excuses, Russo. Excuses, Dante laughed, leaning against the table. You know, I haven't seen you smile this much before. Maybe because I haven't had much to smile about, she replied, her tone softer. Dante's smile faded slightly. I'm sorry for that. For everything. Sarah glanced at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. I know you are. They stood there for a moment, the noise of the kids and parents fading into the background. For the first time, Sarah felt the walls around her heart weaken. Dante had been showing up, again and again, without asking for anything in return. Maybe, just maybe, he meant it when he said he was trying to change. The next day, Sarah sat on her couch, scrolling through her phone when she came across an article about Dante. Dante Russo's mysterious disappearance from the spotlight. Where is the league's golden boy? The piece speculated on why Dante had been so quiet lately. There were no party photos, no flashy interviews, and no scandals. Rumors swirled about injuries, arguments with teammates, and possible retirement. Sarah frowned, reading through the comments. Some of the fans were supportive, but others weren't so kind. Probably hiding out because he's washed up. Golden boy finally fell off his pedestal. I bet he's partying somewhere. He doesn't care about the game. The comments made her angry, not because she felt the need to defend Dante, but because she knew the truth. He wasn't hiding or partying. He was here on a soccer field with kids who idolized him, trying to make a difference. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. She opened it to find Dante standing there, hands in his pockets. "Hey," he said, looking slightly nervous. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "No, it's fine," Sarah said, stepping aside to let him in. "What's up?" Dante rubbed the back of his neck. "I wanted to talk to you about something. Something important." Sarah folded her arms, her curiosity piqued. "Okay, I'm listening." Dante hesitated, searching for the right words. "I need to tell you the truth about that night. About the bet." Sarah's heart sank. She had known this moment would come eventually, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. "What about it?" "I agreed to it because I was an idiot," Dante said, his voice steady but filled with regret. "Marco dared me to ask you out, and I said yes because I thought it would be funny. I didn't think about how it would hurt you or how wrong it was. I was selfish and I was stupid." Sarah stared at him, her arms tightening around herself. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you deserve to hear it from me," Dante said, "not from some article or someone else's mouth. And because I can't stand the thought of you believing I'm still that guy." Sarah looked away, her throat tightening. "So what changed?" "You," Dante said simply. "Meeting you, seeing the way you care about the kids, the way you carry yourself. You showed me what it means to be real, to care about something bigger than yourself." Sarah blinked back tears, shaking her head. "I don't know if I can forgive you for that." "Dante, I don't expect you to," he said softly, "but I needed you to know. I'm not proud of who I was, but I'm trying to be better. Whether you forgive me or not, I'll keep showing up, because it's the right thing to do." The room fell silent. Sarah turned away, crossing to the window to hide the tears she couldn't stop. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him how much it hurt to know she had been a joke to him. But at the same time, she could see the truth in his eyes. He wasn't the same man who had approached her that night. "Why are you still here, Dante?" she whispered. "Because I care about you, Sarah," he replied. "And I want to prove that I'm not that guy anymore." Sarah closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. She didn't know if she could believe him. Not yet. But for the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, he deserved the chance to try. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Dante continued showing up at the community center, keeping his promise to the kids. But the tension between him and Sarah was palpable. She avoided his gaze, her usual sharp comments replaced by distant nods and polite indifference. Dante noticed. One afternoon, as the kids packed up and headed home, Dante stayed behind, lingering near the field. Sarah was organizing equipment, her movements hurried, like she couldn't wait to get away. Dante watched her for a moment before walking over. "Sarah," she didn't look up. "What?" "We need to talk." "I don't think we do." Her voice was flat, clipped. "Please," Dante said softly. "Just give me 5 minutes." Sarah exhaled sharply but didn't argue. She turned to face him, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Dante shoved his hands into his pockets, struggling to find the right words. "I know you don't trust me. I know I hurt you, and I hate myself for it." Sarah flinched slightly, but she said nothing. "But you need to know that this," he gestured to the empty field, "this isn't about the bet anymore. It hasn't been for a long time. You're right. I was an arrogant jerk when I met you. I didn't see people, I saw opportunities. I thought the world revolved around me, and I didn't care who I hurt along the way." Sarah's gaze softened, but her walls remained firmly in place. "And what makes you different now?" "You," Dante said simply. "You showed me what it means to care about something real. These kids, this place, it's not just soccer to you. It's hope. And being here has given me something I didn't know I was missing." Sarah stared at him, her face conflicted. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that he had changed, that his words were real. But the scars of the past made it hard to let go. "Words are easy, Dante," she said finally. "You say you care, but caring doesn't erase what you did." "I know," Dante replied, his voice low, "and I'm not asking you to forgive me. I need you to know that I see you now. Not as a joke, not as a bet, as someone who's stronger and kinder than anyone I've ever known. You deserve more than what I gave you that night." Sarah looked away, blinking back tears. She hated how much his words affected her, how they dug into the cracks she'd tried so hard to seal. For so long, she had believed that people didn't change, that life didn't allow for redemption. And yet, here he was, standing in front of her, not as the golden boy she'd once admired, but as a man willing to face his mistakes. "Why do you care so much?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Because you matter to me," Dante said, stepping closer. "And I want to prove that you were never a joke to me. Not really. I was too blind to see it at first. But now I can't see anything else." Sarah's breath hitched, and for the first time, she let herself see the man standing in front of her. Not Dante Russo, the soccer star, but Dante, the man who showed up every day and gave the kids his all. The man who had humbled himself in a way she never thought possible. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said softly. "You don't have to," Dante replied. "Not yet, but I'll keep showing up until you believe me." For a long moment, they stood there in silence, the only sound the distant laughter of the kids leaving the center. Finally, Sarah turned away, picking up her bag. "I have to go," Dante nodded, stepping back. "Okay." As she walked toward her car, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. A small, fragile flicker of hope she wasn't ready to name just yet. Over the next few weeks, things slowly began to shift between them. Sarah didn't fully let her guard down, but she stopped avoiding Dante. They began to talk more, small conversations about practice, about the kids, about life. Dante listened more than he spoke, asking her questions about her past, her dreams, and her struggles. One afternoon, as they sat together on the sidelines, Dante asked a question that caught Sarah off guard. "Why'd you stop playing soccer?" Sarah paused, her gaze fixed on the kids running across the field. "I had to quit when my dad got sick. I needed to take care of him, and money was tight. Soccer, it wasn't a priority anymore." Dante frowned. "You loved it, though." "Yeah," Sarah said quietly. "I did. Do you ever miss it?" Sarah shrugged, trying to play it off. "Sometimes. But life doesn't always give you what you want." Dante watched her carefully, sensing the sadness in her voice. "You're wrong, you know." Sarah looked at him, brow furrowed. "About what?" "Life doesn't just take. It gives too. Sometimes you just have to fight for what you want." Sarah stared at him, stunned into silence. For so long, she had believed that her dreams didn't matter, that they were luxuries she couldn't afford. But Dante's words struck a chord deep inside her, awakening something she had buried long ago. "Maybe," she said softly, though she wasn't sure she believed it yet. One evening, Dante showed up at Sarah's apartment unannounced. She opened the door to find him standing there with a soccer ball in one hand and a sheepish grin on his face. "What are you doing here?" she asked, confused. "I need your help," Dante replied. "I've got this charity game coming up, and I want you to play with me." Sarah blinked. "What?" "You heard me," Dante said, grinning. "You're always telling the kids to fight for what they want. But what about you? Don't you miss it?" "I can't," Sarah stammered. "It's been years, Dante. I'm not good enough." "That's a lie," Dante said firmly. "You love this game and you're better than you think. I've seen the way you coach the kids. You've still got it, Sarah." Sarah shook her head, backing away slightly. "I can't just play in some charity game. People will laugh at me." "Let them," Dante said, his voice gentle but firm. Who cares what they think? You'll be doing something you love. Sarah stared at him, torn between fear and longing. She couldn't remember the last time someone had believed in her the way Dante did. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Because you gave me a chance," Dante replied. "Now I want to give you one too." Sarah looked down at the soccer ball he held, her heart pounding. She wanted to say no. She wanted to hide, to protect herself from the judgment and embarrassment she knew would come. But deep down, she knew he was right. She did miss it. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to fight for something she wanted. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it." Dante grinned, holding out the ball. "Good, because we're starting practice tomorrow." Sarah rolled her eyes but couldn't hide the small smile tugging at her lips. "You're impossible, and you're going to be great," Dante said, his confidence unwavering. For the first time in years, Sarah felt a spark of excitement. Like a piece of herself she'd thought was lost forever had suddenly come back to life. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the community center feeling nervous. Dante was already there, juggling the soccer ball with an effortless ease that somehow made her irritation flare. "You're late," he teased as she walked onto the field. Sarah rolled her eyes. "I'm not late. You're just early. I like to be prepared," Dante replied, kicking the ball into the air before catching it under his foot. "Ready to start?" "Ready as I'll ever be," Sarah muttered. Dante grinned. "Let's see what you've got, Coach Graham." For the next hour, Dante ran Sarah through drills she hadn't done in years. Basic footwork, passing, and shooting. Her muscles protested with every movement, her legs already burning, but she refused to let it show. "Keep up, Russo," she called as she managed to flick the ball past him, surprising even herself. Dante laughed, jogging to retrieve the ball. "Not bad. You've got some moves." Sarah bit back a smile. "You sound surprised." "I'm impressed," Dante corrected, tossing the ball back to her. "It's in your blood, Sarah. You're a natural." Sarah's chest swelled with pride, but she quickly pushed the feeling down. "Don't get carried away. I'm nowhere near ready for some charity game." "Maybe not yet," Dante replied, his tone softening. "But you will be." They spent the rest of the morning on the field, Dante coaching Sarah in a way that was patient and encouraging. He didn't push her beyond her limits, but he didn't let her slack either. By the time they were done, Sarah was out of breath, her hair sticking to her forehead, and her shirt damp with sweat. "I hate you," she panted, collapsing onto the grass. Dante dropped down beside her, grinning. "You'll thank me later." Doubtful, Sarah shot back, though the edge in her voice was softened by the faint smile on her lips. For a moment, they sat there in silence, both staring up at the clear blue sky. Sarah hadn't felt this alive in years, and though she would never admit it, a part of her was grateful to Dante for pushing her. "You're really doing this," she murmured, finally breaking the silence. "All of this." Dante turned his head to look at her, his expression serious. "Yeah, I am." "Why?" Dante's brow furrowed slightly, as if searching for the right words. "Because I need to prove something to you, to myself, that I can be better, that I can actually be someone worth knowing." Sarah's heart squeezed at the quiet honesty in his voice. For weeks now, she had seen this version of Dante, the one who showed up, who cared, who was trying. And it was getting harder and harder to hold onto the anger she had carried since that night. "People can't just change overnight," she said softly. "I know," Dante replied, "but I'm not going anywhere, Sarah. Promise." The weeks leading up to the charity game passed quickly, and Dante kept his word. He met Sarah at the field every morning, pushing her to get better, celebrating her small victories, and encouraging her when she faltered. At first, Sarah doubted herself at every turn. She fumbled passes, missed shots, and felt her confidence waver. But Dante never let her quit. "You're stronger than you think," he told her one afternoon as she sat on the ground, frustrated after missing another shot. Sarah shook her head. "I'm not like you, Dante. I'm not a pro." "You don't have to be a pro," Dante said, crouching down in front of her. "You just have to believe in yourself. That's half the game right there." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Why do you care so much?" Dante smiled faintly. "Because I've seen what you can do when you believe in yourself. And I want you to see it too." Slowly, Sarah began to improve. Her passes became sharper, her footwork more confident. And for the first time in years, she felt like the girl who had once loved soccer. The kids at the community center noticed, too. They cheered her on during her practices, running onto the field to celebrate whenever she nailed a particularly good shot. "You're gonna kill it at the game, Miss Sarah," Liam shouted one day, running up to hug her. Sarah laughed, ruffling his hair. "We'll see, buddy. I'll do my best. She's got this," Dante said from behind her, his voice filled with confidence. Sarah glanced over her shoulder, meeting his gaze. There was no teasing, no mockery, just genuine pride. And for the first time, she started to believe him. The day of the charity game arrived, and Sarah could barely contain her nerves. She stood in the locker room, lacing up her old cleats with trembling hands. The sounds of the crowd echoed faintly through the walls, reminding her that this wasn't just practice. This was real. "You okay?" Sarah looked up to see Dante standing in the doorway, already dressed in his jersey. His number 9 stood out against the crisp white fabric. "No," Sarah admitted, letting out a shaky breath. "I'm terrified," Dante smiled, walking over to sit beside her. "That's normal. It means you care. What if I mess up?" Sarah asked, her voice small. "Then you get back up and try again," Dante replied. "That's what this game is about. You've already won just by being here." Sarah looked at him, her chest tightening. "What if people laugh at me?" "Let them," Dante said firmly. "They don't matter. The only thing that matters is how you feel when you're out there. And I promise, when that whistle blows, none of this," he gestured to the locker room, "is going to matter. It'll just be you, the ball, and the game you love." Sarah blinked back tears, nodding. "Okay." Dante stood, holding out his hand. "Come on. We've got a game to win." Sarah hesitated before taking his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. For the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she belonged here. The stadium was smaller than the professional arenas Dante was used to, but to Sarah, it felt massive. The stands were filled with people. Families, kids from the community center, and even a few familiar faces from her neighborhood. As she stepped onto the field, the noise hit her all at once. Cheers, whistles, and the steady hum of anticipation. Sarah's heart pounded, her palms sweaty. But then she felt Dante's hand on her shoulder. "You've got this," he said quietly. Sarah nodded, taking a deep breath. The whistle blew and the game began. At first, Sarah felt out of place. The pace was faster than she expected, the players more skilled. She hesitated, second-guessed herself, and stumbled more than once. But then, midway through the first half, something clicked. The ball came to her feet, and for a split second, time seemed to slow. Sarah saw the play unfold in front of her. A gap in the defense, a clear path to the goal. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She just moved. She dribbled past one defender, then another, her movements smooth and instinctual. The crowd roared as she closed in on the goal, her eyes locked on the ball. "Take the shot," Dante shouted. Sarah planted her foot and swung her leg, connecting with the ball perfectly. It soared through the air, slipping past the goalkeeper's outstretched hands and into the back of the net. The stadium erupted into cheers. Sarah froze, her brain struggling to process what had just happened. Then, before she knew it, Dante was there, grabbing her shoulders and spinning her around. "You did it," he shouted, laughing. "You did it, Sarah." She laughed too, tears streaming down her face as her teammates crowded around her, shouting and cheering. For the first time in years, Sarah felt unstoppable. She felt alive. And as she looked out at the crowd, at the kids from the community center waving wildly, at Liam jumping up and down, she realized that none of the judgment, none of the doubts, mattered anymore. She had done this. She had taken the shot. And she had scored. Sarah played with a freedom she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't perfect. She missed passes, got knocked off the ball once or twice, but she didn't let it stop her. Every time she faltered, she picked herself up and kept going. Dante, true to his word, was right there alongside her. He passed her the ball whenever he could, directing the game with a focus that didn't feel like showmanship. It felt genuine, like he wanted her to shine. By the time the final whistle blew, Sarah was breathless and exhausted. The scoreboard didn't matter, though they'd won by a narrow margin. What mattered was the way the crowd erupted into applause. The kids from the community center chanting her name as if she had just won the World Cup. Miss Sarah, Miss Sarah. Liam's voice carried above the noise. His face lit with joy as he waved his small arms wildly from the stands. Sarah dropped to her knees on the grass, overwhelmed by it all. She had done it. She had faced her fears, stepped onto the field, and played the game she had loved for so long. You were amazing. Dante's voice broke through the noise. She looked up to see him standing there, his jersey stained with sweat, his grin wide and proud. He held out his hand, and when she took it, he pulled her to her feet. I couldn't have done it without you, Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly. Yes, you could have, Dante replied, his tone gentle but firm. You just needed to believe it. Sarah stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. For so long, she had let other people's opinions define her. She had let her own fears hold her back. But Dante had seen something in her, something she hadn't even seen in herself, and for that, she was grateful. Before she could say anything else, Liam and a group of kids ran onto the field, swarming Sarah and Dante with cheers and hugs. Liam latched onto Sarah's waist, grinning up at her. You're the best, Miss Sarah. I told you you'd do great. Sarah laughed, ruffling his hair. Thanks, buddy. You were right. You scored on a pro. Another kid shouted, pointing at Dante. Miss Sarah's a legend. Dante chuckled, holding his hands up in mock surrender. She got me fair and square. I don't stand a chance against Coach Sarah. The kids erupted into laughter, and for a moment, Sarah let herself bask in the joy of it all. After the game, the stadium began to empty, and the noise gradually faded to a peaceful hum. Dante and Sarah lingered on the field, watching as the last of the families headed for the exits. The golden glow of sunset cast long shadows across the grass, and a gentle breeze carried the faint sound of laughter in the distance. You did it, Dante said quietly, breaking the silence. Sarah smiled, turning to look at him. I didn't think I could. I did, he replied, his voice steady. I always did. Sarah's smile faltered slightly, her chest tightening. Why, Dante? Why did you care so much about me playing in this game? Dante met her gaze, his expression serious. Because I wanted you to see what I see. You're strong, Sarah. You've been strong this whole time, but you've let other people make you believe otherwise. You don't need their approval. You don't need mine. You just need to trust yourself. Sarah looked down, her throat tight. It's hard to believe that sometimes. I know, Dante said softly, but you proved it today. You didn't let anyone stop you. Not the crowd, not your fears, not even me. Sarah let out a quiet laugh, blinking back tears. You sound like a motivational poster, Dante grinned. I'm serious. I know, Sarah replied, meeting his eyes. And thank you for pushing me, for believing in me when I didn't. Dante stepped closer, his voice low. You don't owe me anything, Sarah. If anything, I owe you. You changed my life. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, her defenses slowly crumbling. How? Dante took a breath, his gaze never leaving hers. Before I met you, I didn't know what it meant to care about someone. I spent my whole life chasing trophies, fame, and validation. I thought that's what made me valuable. But you showed me that none of it matters if you don't have people who believe in you. People you can be real with. He paused, searching her face. I was a fool that night. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope you can see that I'm not that person anymore. I don't care about the bet, the noise, or what anyone else thinks. Care about you. Sarah stared at him, her heart racing. For weeks, she had struggled to trust him, to believe that he was sincere. But standing there, in the quiet glow of the evening, she knew he was telling the truth. I wanted to hate you, she admitted, her voice trembling. You hurt me, Dante. You embarrassed me, and I thought I would never be able to move past that. Dante's face fell, but he didn't look away. I know, and I'm sorry, but Sarah continued, swallowing hard. You proved me wrong. You showed me that people can change. And maybe I can too. Dante's eyes softened, his voice barely above a whisper. Does that mean you forgive me? Sarah hesitated for a moment before nodding. Yeah, I do. The relief on Dante's face was immediate, like a weight he had been carrying for months had finally lifted. Thank you, he said softly. Sarah smiled, her heart feeling lighter than it had in years. Don't make me regret it, Dante chuckled, shaking his head. I won't. Promise. The sun had almost completely set by the time they left the field. As they walked together toward the parking lot, Sarah glanced at Dante, a faint smile playing on her lips. So what now? She asked. Dante looked at her, his brow furrowing slightly. What do you mean? Now that the game's over, the kids are happy, and you've proven yourself, Sarah teased. What's next for Dante Russo? Dante smiled, his gaze soft. I don't know, but I think I'll figure it out. One day at a time, Sarah nodded, feeling a quiet peace settle over her. Me too. They reached their cars, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Dante looked at her, his expression earnest. Can I see you tomorrow? Sarah tilted her head, smiling faintly. Only if you can keep up. Dante laughed, opening his car door. Challenge accepted. As Sarah watched him drive away, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Dante Russo had walked into her life as a joke, as part of a cruel dare, but somewhere along the way he had changed, and so had she. For the first time, she believed that maybe, just maybe, people could surprise you. And maybe, just maybe, she could surprise herself too.